Hey y'all, it's Mix JB back with another video. And as a part of my series for my Race and Ethnic Studies Senior Capstone Project, I want to talk about community care. How can we take care of each other in the time of the COVID-19 pandemic? Specifically looking towards marginalized communities such as Black and Brown people and also queer people, understanding that there's intersectionality between those three communities and even more marginalized communities than what I just mentioned. So to get started, I kind of wanted to first touch on my experience through community care through the pandemic when it first started. I feel for me myself as a Pisces sun, um, I'm also going to include maybe a little bit of astrology, maybe a little. But as a Pisces sun, which is basically like a person who's very creative but also wants space, I feel like during the pandemic, I definitely isolated myself from my communities because I just couldn't wrap my own head around what was happening. And as a community leader, it was really hard for me at the time to make the space that my community needed, that people in my community who depend on me to do things like that. It was really hard to meet those expectations. And for me, I just felt myself crumbling under the pressure. And the best response to me was to completely shut myself out, which in the long run didn't really help me because I needed a lot more help than what I thought I did. So now, fast forwarding to 2021, now a year later into the pandemic, into quarantining, into social distancing, now we have vaccines. I feel like making virtual community has been easy and a challenge at the same time. For so many people, for so many reasons, I feel like taking classes online as a college student merged my home life and my work life in ways that were unhealthy, in ways that for me it was hard to kind of see where my personal life began and where my work ended. And for me, that was a dynamic that never sat well with me because it kind of perpetuates heavy working, hard working, especially like all these negative capitalistic traits. In a time where you couldn't work, but work was still demanded of you. So many people thought that during quarantine, a lot of people had to use the time to start a business. You have LLC Twitter, which is a Black Twitter term for a lot of minority people who advocated for starting businesses without taking into consideration that people needed to simply survive during a pandemic. A lot of times, especially when the stimulus checks hit, so many people were trying to dictate how other people use their money, what they use their money for. And if they don't use their money for certain things in their eyes, they were making mistakes. They were just wasting an opportunity. And I didn't really like that because it really perpetuates this idea that we have to find a way to work. We have to find a way to continue to give ourselves to a capitalist machine that is so used to chewing us up and spitting us out once they have gotten what they needed from us. So now I'm trying to face this question. So now I'm in the middle of facing this question that I want to ask of all of you, but something that I'm still struggling with myself is, how do we build community? How do we build something sustainable during this time? Something that feels just as personal as in-person communication, but not only virtual, but also with less resources, with less access to the internet. Some people are still suffering from the divide the digital gap has created. And for me, it's just been the most challenging to try to keep in touch with people who are in my community, who I have already established community with, but also build community, continue to network. only solely via the internet. I feel it's much easier for newer generations, such as later, like the latter half of millennials and even Gen Z. It's a little bit easier for us to do that, but it also is so draining mentally and physically when I have to sit in front of a camera all day, every day, and be physically alone, although virtually in the presence of other people. And with that being said, I'm kind of just in a phase of finding who I am as a person, using my time by myself to try to build on myself, but also trying to contribute in meaningful ways to communities that I have already established. And that dichotomy has been much more challenging, especially because everything is now being done virtually from home. So a lot of times I find myself not even needing to leave the home to do the things that I love to do. And in some ways, it has been a blessing in terms of accessibility, but in some ways, it also has been very alienating and very inaccessible to those same people. So I find a lot of times this issue is always more complex than um, everyone in our society tries to make it out to be. So now that brings me to the community healing. How do we move forward from here? How do we continue to grow as individuals? These are all questions and more that I'm currently trying to figure out for myself. But I think it could simply look like making the space for people who you know, while also understanding that downtime, alone time is important and is just as valuable and needs to be cherished as well. And with that being said, that brings me to the end of this segment of my project. Please let me know what you think about the thoughts I've had to share with you in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next one.